Now, Cameroon security forces used tear gas to break up protests by opposition supporters in Yaoundé and Garao amid mounting tensions over the presidential election held on October 12th. Partial tallies reported by local media and citing the National Vote Counting Commission show 92-year-old President Paul Biya is on track to win an 8th term, a result that would keep him in office well into his 100s if confirmed by the Constitutional Council. Now, the opposition, however, has rejected the reported outcome. Issa, Tchiroma, a former minister and Biya's main challenger, claimed that he won and warned of unrest if the results are not overturned. So authorities arrested over 20 people in Garao, charging them with incitement to rebellion, and indicated that they will face military tribunals. Meanwhile, protests have spread in other cities, with demonstrators voicing concerns about irregularities in the vote count and demanding stronger transparency. Today on The Conversation, I'm joined by Paul Achang, political analyst in Yaoundé, Cameroon. Thank you so much, Paul, for joining us at this time. All right.
Thank you very much. Good evening, and thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, provisional results show President Biya leading with approximately 53% compared to opposition candidate Issa Tchiroma with 35%. How credible are the opposition's claims of outright victory? Let's start with that. And what are your thoughts on this?
Well, these claims are based really on the report proceedings. What happens in the Cameroon elections is pretty simple. We have polling stations, and at each polling station, each political party that takes part in the presidential election has at least 2 representatives at the polling stations. Now, over the national territory in Cameroon, you have about 31,000 polling stations. So sometimes it's quite difficult for all the political parties equally to have a representative of each political party within the polling stations and the commissions of these polling stations as well. Now, as the procedure, as the election goes forward, each political party at a polling station needs to have a copy of the report proceedings. So basically, at the end of the election, on election day, each political party can equally make known the report of the proceedings based on the elections in their circumscriptions. Now, based on the results from the FSNC party, which is Issa Tchiroma's party, they believe they have more proceedings, more report proceedings in their possession that qualify them to be able to determine that they won the election. Now, in Cameroon, what actually happens is once they leave the polling stations and the polling commissions, in terms of the report proceedings, it moves on to a departmental commission for compilation. After the compilation, it goes to the national tally for vote counting, before the Constitutional Council now tallies all these reports and now gives actually, in terms of the proclamation, who is the winner. During 72 hours after the elections, actually, each political party, based on the report proceedings from the election day, can now forward a recourse, that is a legal recourse, to the Constitutional Council, and therefore the Constitutional Council can take abreast of it. And then 10 days after the election, they begin reviewing in terms of the legal proceedings. Now, today in Yaoundé, Cameroon, the Constitutional Council reviewed about 8 legal recourses that were deposited by different political parties. They viewed them inadmissible. So we are left now onto a situation where we really understand that it's really the real issue here would be the contention of the electoral code. Now, the interpretation of 2 articles in the Electoral Code. There's Article 113 that gives the ability of each political party to make known the report of the proceedings that happen in the electoral booth. And then there's Article 137 that gives the competence and the legality only to the Constitutional Council to declare the winner of the election.
Yes, yes. So while you're saying that now, what risks does this such a public claim, with Tchiroma declaring that their victory is clear, what risks does such a public claim ahead of official certification by the Constitutional Court pose for Cameroon's political stability?
Now, that's a very good question, because here, Tchiroma didn't declare himself winner. He says he has enough provisional report proceedings to make him the winner. Now, also with the ruling CPDM party, they have people who say they have enough report proceedings to declare them the winner. Now, it is true that if you officially declare yourself the winner before the end of the electoral process in Cameroon, you risk a sanction from the penal code, which means you can actually be arrested in terms of Cameroon law for an infraction to the electoral process, and you'll be put in front of a trial of the military tribunal in Cameroon. But what we've observed so far is a little bit of proportion where we saw Issa Tchiroma, maybe we'll call them his bloggers, maybe use social media to show the report of the proceedings in most of the huge electoral circumscriptions to show that they were possibly the winner, and then use maybe their own tally report to show that they feel that with the report of the proceedings, they had 54% of the vote. Whereas also on the other side, they say with the report of their own proceedings, they feel that they had 53% of the vote. But we have not really seen in terms of Issa Tchiroma, in terms of saying, I have won the election. We have seen him basically use a communication tool, which is kind of saying, I have enough of the report proceedings to declare myself the winner. I'm waiting on the incumbent to acknowledge that with the report of my proceedings, he acknowledges that I have won the election. So it's a little bit there's a game between both parties and both candidates, and we're yet to see essentially really what everyone is waiting for is a declaration from the Constitutional Council. But we can see from the opposition that based on the report of the proceedings, they are not happy with what they deem as maybe say a fairness in the procedure, or what we'll call it transparency from the electoral commissions at the polling stations.
All right, now let's talk about, the interplay between election and security, because in the far north, we have Boko Haram attacks. In the Anglophone regions, we have separatist conflicts. How do these security challenges constrain democratic space and also influence the behavior of both voters and state actors?
Now, this is a very key point because as an indicator in Cameroon, in the 2018 presidential elections, we had 6 million registered voters. In this election in 2025, we had about 8 million registered voters. The population of Cameroon is about 30 to 35 million and growing. Now, what you have here is a majority of the population that's apolitical, that's not really interested in politics. And so we've seen a voter turnout within this election where you had a higher percentage of registered voters actually go to the polls to vote. Unfortunately, what usually transcribes in terms of insecurities after the elections, they are mostly the frustrated non-registered voters that actually go onto the streets. So with the security issues in the Northwest and the Southwest, because it was quite difficult actually for most of the political formations to do a fruitful campaign within the English-speaking regions of the Northwest and Southwest due to the insecurity. We saw maybe some candidates like the opposition from Issa Tchiroma use maybe say the separatist movement as showing that he had maybe a connection with them to show that he could solve the issue. But what we really saw more of is in the areas where there's insecurity, we saw a less propensity of people actually voting. We saw maybe with Boko Haram, we see constant incursions. I think as of yesterday even, there were incursions. So there are really security challenges in the extreme north of Cameroon and in the English-speaking regions of Cameroon because of the porous borders. Now, it's left to see now what most Cameroons are waiting for is to be able to see whoever is declared winner, what they will do. But in the meantime, the responsibility in terms of security, in terms of law and order, falls on the government agent in charge of handling and supervising elections, which is kind of the Ministry of Interior, which is the Ministry of Territorial Administration. Because what happens is throughout the national territory, in collaboration with the forces of law and order, they put in place task force, anti-riot unit, which can be able to reassure citizens throughout the national territory. What we have in Cameroon is we have regions, we don't have states. So therefore, we have seen most of the governors of the regions, most of the administrative authorities go on the field to try in a pacific way to sensitize and educate citizens about the responsibility of peace and not inflame the atmosphere of post-electoral violence. So far, so much it's been working because we have seen manifestations that slightly got maybe a little bit violent, but by the end of the day, we saw that the administrative authorities and the forces of law and order and the population were able to simmer down the manifestations and they went non-violent. We see sporadic issues of violence in terms of manifestations, but also some qualify the manifestations as carried out by necessarily political affiliations. and not necessarily by the populations themselves. So as we move on with the declaration, probably which will be convened on the 27th of October, we are yet to see now, we are seeing more and more post-electoral, maybe I'll say enthusiasm beginning to come back down, and a gradual normalcy.
Okay. Now, the Minister of Territorial Administration has confirmed that 20 arrested prosecutors will face military courts on charges of insurrections. And some say that this is quite a cynical use of the judicial system to intimidate the population and also to deter any further street action. What do you say?
Well, unfortunately, in Cameroon, the law is quite very difficult in the sense that the law is not really, it's not flexible. During the electoral process, any, what we call them, any infractions toward the electoral process before the completion of it, the penal code in Cameroon is quite harsh, unfortunately. You can have pacific manifestations, but you do need the authorizations of administrative authorities, and before they give you the authorization for a peaceful manifestation, sometimes it's quite difficult during the electoral process. So therefore, those who are maybe, say, held in contempt of maybe infractions during the electoral process, the charges per the Cameroon Penal Code are sometimes extremely harsh. Well, this is by the Constitution of Cameroon. This was probably since post-independence. So it hasn't really changed in terms of the flexibility of it. So 9 times out of 10, what happens is those who are maybe caught in post-electoral violence in Cameroon, whether they be maybe partisan, political, or apolitical, the charges are usually, in terms of the republic, in terms of Cameroon's judiciary, very severe. That's why very severe. That's why they go towards a military tribunal a lot of times. Now, in terms of the revision of the Constitution, can these charges be maybe changed? Can they be ameliorated? I think, which is what most of the political stakeholders are actually striving for, an amelioration probably of the electoral code, and maybe the sanctions against the infraction for those during the electoral process who are political stakeholders who might go maybe too far or who might be too enthusiastic based on their political allegiance.
All right. Now, just before we let you go, election monitors cited several irregularities, including outdated voter rolls and polling station relocation. How will this national electoral crisis inevitably compound or even inflame the pre-existing security and political conflicts in the country's Anglophone regions?
Now, that's a very important question. Now, Cameroon's electoral process is sort of very manual. It is biometric in terms of the voter's card, but the process in itself is very manual. So sometimes what happens at the polling stations is that those who are within the polling station commissions, which are the autonomous agency, the independent body that handles the material organizations of elections, the administrative authorities, and the representatives of political parties, they actually go through a manual process. And sometimes this manual process goes through a balance and check. And of course, when there's balance and checking, sometimes it's not too accurate in that sense. So therefore, you find that difficulty in transparency. I think that is probably where the international and the national observers witness the process. That's why per Cameroon's electoral code, after the election, it takes 15 days actually for the various commissions to be able to go through the process before you declare the winner. And in this process, you have 3 different commissions, and they have about approximately each 5 days in terms of work to be able to compile. And this compilation is done manually, and the responsibility is on the political parties and stakeholders themselves. So that's why you find the opposition in a sort of a dilemma, because you have a manual process, and these political parties have to be able to, throughout the national territory, have at least 2 observers within a polling station. That means a political party, for example, needs about 60,000 observers for all the 31,000 polling stations. Sometimes in terms of resources, they don't have that capacity, they don't have that capability. What most are looking forward in terms of security and transparency is for that, in terms of the report of the proceedings at the polling stations, that procedure is ameliorated so that that procedure becomes either numeric or it becomes digital. Okay. I think in that regard, that is the procedure and the process will help out, where you can have a comparison, where you can compile and compare report of proceedings from various political parties before now you come to the Constitutional Council for a tally, which is legitimate, and you can declare the winner.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Paul Echang. You've spoken really well. Thank you for your time as well. Political analyst in Yaoundé, Cameroon.